The marble halls of the Fulton County Courthouse carried the chill of judgment. My combat boots echoed against polished stone as I walked through the double doors, every step drawing eyes. I wore my Army dress blues, the Army Achievement Medal pinned to my chest, catching the fluorescent light. To me, it was a reminder of soldiers kept alive through the meals I engineered under fire. To my family, it was a costume. "Take that off!" My mother Coretta hissed from the plaintiff's table. Her pearls trembled at her throat as if strangling her. My brother Calvin leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smirk. "Playing soldier again, Ruby. Heating up rations doesn't make you a chef." The courtroom murmured. I felt heat rise in my face, but I didn't let it show. Silence had always been my armor. Instead, I walked to the witness table, unpinned my medal, and set it down. The clink of metal against wood reverberated like a rifle shot. "They called me the kitchen girl," I said quietly, voice carrying farther than I intended. "But none of you knew I fed 5,000 soldiers a day." A sharp gasp rippled across the benches. My family restaurant, Washington's Soul Kitchen, once a cornerstone of Atlanta dining, was bleeding out $50,000 a month. They had chosen to blame me, the daughter who left for the Army, for abandoning the legacy. Now they fought to cut me out completely, painting me as the deserter. The lawyer Sterling Chase stood and adjusted his tie. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are not here to glorify military canteens. We are here to determine who deserves to inherit the Washington name." The so-called Sergeant Washington left her family to play soldier overseas. Meanwhile, Calvin and Leela stayed here, running the restaurant. She forfeited her right. I looked at him, unblinking. He knew nothing about deserts or siege kitchens or the smell of soldiers breaking from starvation. He only knew ledgers. Sterling flipped a page with theatrical flair. "But there is another matter. Ruby Washington founded a company, Spice Tech Nutrition. Recent valuations place its worth at $600 million. His voice sharpened. "She built this fortune on family recipes, without consent, without respect. And now she wants the restaurant too." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked like insects. My mother covered her face with trembling hands as though my success was shame. Calvin only sneered deeper, the smirk of a man who believed truth could always be twisted. I sat taller. Inside, my thoughts formed like orders across a battlefield. I wasn't a daughter fighting for scraps of inheritance. I was a logistics officer analyzing hostile terrain. Coretta rose suddenly, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You abandoned your blood for strangers. Cooking for soldiers isn't real cooking. You took Moses's recipes and disgraced them." "Enough," Calvin said smoothly, pretending to soothe her but feeding the fire. He leaned toward the judge. "She thinks turning MREs into stew makes her Gordon Ramsay." Laughter bubbled from their side of the courtroom. I kept my eyes on the judge. Inside, I whispered to myself, "They see a costume. I see armor earned in sand and smoke." Judge Hayes lifted his gavel for silence. His expression was unreadable, his voice measured. "Before we proceed further, I need clarity. Is the defendant before this court Ruby Washington the daughter, Ruby Washington the sergeant, or Ruby Washington the CEO?" The room froze, every gaze snapping toward me. I felt the weight of decades pressing down. The kitchen girl nobody praised, the soldier nobody welcomed home, the innovator they called a thief. My throat burned, but I refused to blink. A reporter leaned forward, pen hovering above notepad, eyes wide. A juror cleared his throat as if uncomfortable being caught in such a family storm. The bailiff shifted his stance, one hand resting on his belt, as though expecting the air itself to break into a fight. Calvin whispered to Sterling, smug and certain, "She won't know what to say. She never does." Coretta dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, glancing around to make sure everyone saw her tears. I clasped my hands together on the table, feeling the faint ridges of old burn scars against my palm. The scars always reminded me of the night I'd saved lives while my family rewrote the story. My jaw tightened. "I am all of those," I said finally, steady and deliberate. My voice filled the chamber, quiet but commanding. "And more." A shiver of silence spread through the gallery, the kind that precedes revelation. For a moment, I thought I saw the judge's eyes soften, curiosity replacing judgment. But before I could continue, memory broke through like smoke rising from a forgotten kitchen. The scent of cornbread, the scrape of cast-iron pans, and Grandpa Moses's voice. "Food is love made visible, baby girl." That memory pulled me backward into the beginning of everything, into the kitchen where my story truly started. Long before the courthouse, before the medals and the contracts and the firestorms of betrayal, there was the kitchen. I was 8 years old, standing on a wooden stool in the back of Washington's Soul Kitchen, sleeves rolled up to my elbows, my hair falling in loose strands around my face. The clatter of pots, the hiss of oil, the laughter of diners out front, it was my entire world. Grandpa Moses stood beside me, his weathered hands guiding mine as I sprinkled cayenne into a pot of collard greens. He leaned down, his voice rough from years of smoke and bourbon. "Food is love made visible, baby girl," he whispered. "It ain't just about feeding bellies, it's about feeding souls." To me, it felt like gospel. To the rest of the family, it was nonsense. Calvin was already paraded as the future owner, shaking hands with customers like a politician. Leela rehearsed how to greet guests at the door, practicing smiles in the mirror. And me, I was the helper, the shadow in the kitchen. By the time I was 10, I was already experimenting, adding garlic to mac and cheese, honey to cornbread, a touch of ginger to sweet potato pie. Diners loved it, though they never knew it was me. The credit always went to Calvin. One Thanksgiving, when a customer choked on dry stuffing, I improvised, adding broth and herbs at the last second. The man came back a week later, asking to see that little girl who made the stuffing. My parents sent him away with a polite smile. "She doesn't take compliments," they said. That night, as I scrubbed pans in the sink, I overheard them talking in the dining room. "She's too much like Moses," my father muttered. "Thinks cooking is art. This is a business, not a playground." My mother's voice was sharper. "If we let her keep meddling, she'll ruin everything." Those words branded me deeper than any scar I would carry later. I learned that my worth was invisible, that silence was expected, and that the only thing they wanted from me was obedience. So I perfected every dish in defiance, turning every spoonful into rebellion they would never taste. One evening, while helping Grandpa prepare gumbo, I reached for the flour jar and felt something hard beneath the powder. Hidden inside was a purple heart wrapped in wax paper. I turned to him, wide-eyed. "Grandpa, what's this?" He froze for a moment, then took the metal gently from my hands. "That," he said slowly, "is what the family doesn't want to talk about. I was a cook in Korea, fed a unit in the Chosin Reservoir when everything went to hell. These recipes, they weren't just meals, they kept men alive." I remember the weight in his eyes as he tucked the metal back into hiding. "Don't ever forget, Ruby. Food can be weapon and remedy both. You got the spice in your soul. One day it'll save lives." The next morning, I caught my father watching us from the hallway, his expression hard as iron. At dinner, he announced that Calvin would be the one to inherit the restaurant. "Boys run the business," he said flatly. "Girls support." My mother nodded without a word, her silence cutting deeper than her scolding ever had. Still, I kept cooking. I filled Grandpa's notebook with my tweaks, each page a secret world where my hands were free. I knew if they saw it, they'd burn it. But to me, those scribbled margins, extra cumin here, less sugar there, were the only place I felt alive. By 16, the distance between us was clear as daylight. Calvin walked the front of the house like he owned it, already wearing ties and cufflinks. Leela practiced her smile until her cheeks ached, and I stayed in the back, apron stained, knuckles raw from chopping. Yet every time I placed a dish on the pass-through window, I felt a surge of pride. Diners devoured it, never knowing the kitchen girl had touched their plates. Grandpa caught my eye once as I plated a catfish with my own twist on the spice rub. He winked, then whispered, "You keep writing your own recipe even if they never taste it." But the family didn't want innovation. They wanted tradition embalmed in grease and salt, unchanged for decades. They didn't see my skill as a gift. They saw it as a threat. And in a house where tradition meant control, threats had to be buried. The laughter from the dining room never reached me. I was the ghost in their house, the shadow behind their success. Yet even in silence, I felt the fire building. A fire that would one day consume more than grease and pans. And as I scrubbed my hands raw that night, the scars of invisible labor deepening with each day, I began to understand. I wasn't just cooking for them. I was cooking my way out. By the time I was 17, the restaurant had become both prison and battlefield. Every day I tied on the apron, moving through the kitchen like a soldier in hostile terrain. The grease-coated walls, the clang of pans, the endless orders shouted from the front, all of it blurred into routine. But beneath that rhythm, tension simmered, ready to ignite. It happened on a Friday night, the kind when the dining room overflowed and the heat pressed down like a southern July. Calvin was out front, charming guests with a smile too wide, and Leela hovered by the fryer, pretending to help while sneaking glances at her reflection in the metal. I was on the line, moving with practiced precision, plating catfish and collard greens, keeping pace while the orders stacked high. Then came the sound that still haunts me, the pop of oil followed by a roar. Flames leapt from the fryer where Leela had wandered off, distracted by a text on her phone. In an instant, smoke filled the kitchen, thick and choking. Diners screamed as the fire alarm blared. I didn't think, I acted. Grabbing the fire blanket, I shoved it over the fryer, then turned toward the dining room. The smoke rolled outward, panic spreading with it. "This way!" I shouted, waving toward the side exit. I pulled open the door, guiding people out, lifting a toddler into my arms when his mother tripped. My lungs burned, my arms shook, but I kept moving until the room cleared. By the time firefighters arrived, I was standing outside, soot streaking my face, holding the boy against my chest while his mother sobbed into my shoulder. Reporters snapped photos, their flashes cutting through the haze. The Atlanta Journal headline the next morning called me a teenage hero. But inside my own home, the story turned to ash. Coretta stood before the cameras, her voice smooth with practiced sorrow. "Ruby has always been impulsive," she said, her hand gripping her pearls like a noose. "We are still investigating her role in the accident. Our family restaurant has a reputation to protect." Calvin picked up the torch, telling reporters I'd been experimenting with dangerous cooking methods, suggesting the fire was my fault. And when the security footage that showed Leela leaving the fryer unattended mysteriously went missing, their version became the truth. I tried to protest once. "It wasn't me," I whispered to my mother. "You know it wasn't me." She looked at me with cold eyes, the same eyes that once glowed when I sang nursery rhymes in her kitchen. "Better you take the blame than Leela," she said flatly. "The business can survive one reckless girl. It can't survive a ruined reputation." That night, I scrubbed at my skin in the shower until the burn scars on my arm flared red. They were proof of what I had done, and proof of the lie my family had built around me. Every glance in the mirror reminded me I had saved lives, but in their story I had almost destroyed everything. The toddler's mother called the restaurant again and again, asking to thank me. Calvin told her I was unavailable. I overheard him laughing about it with his friends. She's not a hero, she's a liability. I carried the silence like a rucksack. Every word unsaid weighed me down until my chest ached. Grandpa tried to soften it. He pressed an army recruitment pamphlet into my hands one night after closing. "You want out?" he asked quietly. "You want a place where they'll see what you can really do?" I looked at him, my throat tight. He nodded at the pamphlet. "That's your real recipe for freedom." I tucked it into his old cookbook, the same one with notes about Chaucer, about survival through spice. For the first time, I let myself imagine a world beyond these walls. Still, I stayed silent in public. For the sake of the restaurant, for the sake of appearances, I let them hang the blame on me. But inside, something shifted. My obedience had become complicity, and I couldn't carry it anymore. "If I'm gonna burn," I whispered to myself as I stared at the scars on my arm, "let it be for something that matters." The decision formed that night, solid as iron. I would not live and die in a kitchen that erased me. If fire was my curse, then fire would also be my way out. The next chapter of my life would not be written in grease and smoke, but in sand and sweat. I signed the enlistment papers 2 weeks after the fire, still carrying the smell of smoke in my hair and the sting of scars on my arm. The recruiter didn't care about family stories or blame. He cared that I passed the tests, that I had endurance in my stride and fire in my eyes. When I boarded the bus to Fort Jackson, I felt like I was stepping out of one prison and into another, but this one promised transformation. The first morning hit me like a hammer. The bugle call jolted us from bunks, and before I could catch a breath, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was screaming in our faces. "Washington, you think this is your mama's kitchen? Move, move, move." His voice thundered across the field, but I didn't flinch. I knew kitchens hotter than this, louder than this, more unforgiving than this. The mess hall was where I began to stand out. On day 3, I picked up the standard Army chow tray, powdered eggs, lukewarm sausage, and biscuits that could break a tooth. I tasted it and whispered under my breath, "This could kill morale faster than enemy fire." The soldier next to me laughed, but the words carried. Rodriguez snapped his head around. "Washington, you got a problem with Army cuisine." I stood at attention, tray in hand. "No, Drill Sergeant, I got solutions." By the end of the week, I'd earned a nickname. Using the few authorized seasonings, scraps of hot sauce packets, and even foraged herbs from the edge of the training fields, I started mixing flavor into the gray rations. One night I crushed crackers into a stew, added wild onion, and suddenly half the platoon wanted my version. Morale shifted. Soldiers began lining up where I stood, grinning like kids at a fair. Rodriguez tried it once. He lifted the spoon suspiciously, tasted, then blinked in disbelief. "Damn spice," he muttered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This actually tastes like food." The name stuck. Spice. For the first time, I wore a label that wasn't meant to diminish me. The impact was immediate. Sick calls dropped. PT scores improved. Even the hardest soldiers admitted mealtime no longer felt like punishment. They started a saying, half joke, half truth. "Spice saves lives." At night, I wrote letters home, describing how I was feeding hundreds of soldiers daily, learning nutrition science, discovering what food could do beyond taste. The letters came back unopened, stamped, returned to sender. One carried a note in Calvin's handwriting. "Stop embarrassing us. Come home and learn real cooking." I stared at it for a long time before folding it carefully into my journal. Their rejection no longer burned, it hardened into resolve. But in the Army, I found something I'd never had, family who saw me. Private Jessica Martinez, wiry and sharp-eyed, confided in me one evening as we scrubbed trays. She had been hiding an eating disorder, terrified of failing the physical standards. I taught her tricks, broths she could stomach, nutrient mixes she wouldn't reject. Slowly, she began to recover, and in return, she called me sister. Not out of blood, but out of trust. One evening after lights out, I sat alone, scribbling notes in Grandpa's cookbook that I'd smuggled with me. My flashlight flickered over margins filled with formulas, flavor ratios, ideas for sustaining soldiers in combat. That was when a letter slid under the door. It wasn't from home. The envelope bore the insignia of the Pentagon. Inside was a short note on official stationery. Sergeant Washington, your field nutrition innovations have reached us. Colonel Sarah Chen requests your presence for a special assignment. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding. Someone out there, someone with real authority, saw me not as a liability, not as a ghost in the kitchen, but as a soldier with something vital to offer. The bunk around me was silent except for the soft breathing of exhausted recruits, yet I felt the world tilt, as if a door had opened only I could see. As I tucked the letter into Grandpa's cookbook, I felt the weight of destiny pressing down. I was no longer just the kitchen girl, no longer just the scapegoat of a family fire. I was Spice, and my recipe was no longer about surviving their rejection. It was about changing the way soldiers survived war itself. The letter from the Pentagon burned in my pocket like a secret flame, but before I could follow it, orders sent me overseas. Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Chapman, Coast Province. It wasn't the Pentagon's clean halls or polished offices that tested me. It was the dust, the endless threat of ambush, and the weight of 1,200 soldiers depending on 3 cooks to keep them alive. The air reeked of diesel and sweat, a scent that clung to everything, even the bread. Supplies came by convoy, trucks crawling over mountains laced with IEDs. Every delivery felt like a gamble with death. We learned to stretch rations like elastic, turning gray MRE bricks into something barely edible. But I wanted more than survival. I wanted my men to taste hope. Then came the day the convoy didn't arrive. The explosion echoed miles away, and word spread through the base like wildfire. Ambush, casualties, supplies destroyed. We had 18 hours of food left. Soldiers whispered in the chow line, fear sharper than hunger. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for the girl they called Spice to work a miracle. That night, smoke from the burn pit drifted into the mess hall as I stood over an empty pantry. The senior NCO shook his head. Washington, we can't feed them on herbs and promises. Stick to protocol. I tightened my jaw. Sir, protocol won't keep them on their feet. I scavenged everything. Wild onions from the edge of the wire, scraps of lentils forgotten in storage, herbs grown in makeshift pots by homesick soldiers. I boiled gray water twice, turned it into broth, and mixed nutrient powder scavenged from medical stores. My hands moved on instinct, guided by memories of Grandpa's notebook and his whispered lessons about survival. The first batch of siege soup went out in dented steel trays. Soldiers slurped cautiously, then with hunger, then with relief. By the 3rd meal, lines stretched out the door, bowls held high, faces lighter despite the smoke of incoming fire. A private leaned in as I ladled another scoop. Spice, he muttered, you're keeping us alive. On the 3rd day, insurgents attacked the perimeter. Gunfire cracked through the air while mortars rattled the base. Soldiers who should have been weak from hunger fought with steady hands, bellies full enough to give them strength. I stayed in the kitchen, boiling, mixing, serving, my ears tuned to the staccato rhythm of war outside. Every tray I filled felt like ammunition against despair. When the siege finally broke, not one soldier had collapsed from hunger, not one casualty from malnutrition. The commander pinned the Army Achievement Medal to my chest weeks later, but I knew the true award was the nods from men who had doubted me, the whispered nickname that grew louder with each passing day, Guardian Angel of Hunger. The Military Times ran a story. Innovative food specialist saves base during siege. But back in Atlanta, the local paper dismissed it with a single line. Local girl plays army cook abroad. Calvin told neighbors over Sunday dinner she just heated canned food. Anyone could do that. I stared at the clipping in the quiet of my bunk, rage simmering. They couldn't erase what I'd done no matter how they spun it. Not this time. When mail finally came through, a package waited for me. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a tin of spice jars. A note in familiar handwriting lay on top, proud of my granddaughter. Keep the fire burning, Grandpa Moses. I pressed the paper to my chest, my throat tight. For once, someone in my bloodline had seen me, not as a liability, not as a mistake, but as what I truly was. That night, Sergeant Marcus, one of the infantrymen I'd fed through the siege, knelt beside me in the mess tent after chow. "Ruby," he said, eyes steady, "marry me when we get back stateside." His hands shook as he held out a simple band, scratched and dented from weeks of fighting. I didn't answer right away, torn between the weight of war and the faint spark of something resembling hope. But before I could decide, new orders came down. The Pentagon hadn't forgotten me. Colonel Sarah Chen's request was waiting. I looked out at the mountains under the Afghan moon, the ring still cold in my hand, the spice jars lined up on my bunk like medals. The war had tested my recipes. The next chapter would test me. The medal ceremony at Bagram was supposed to be a triumph. Soldiers stood in formation under the thin Afghan sun, clapping as the commander pinned the Army Achievement Medal on my chest. Cameras flashed, hands shook mine, and the words "exemplary service" echoed in my ears. For a moment, I let myself believe this recognition might finally bridge the distance between me and Atlanta. That night, after chow, I found a quiet corner near the comms tent. The air smelled of dust and diesel, the hum of generators carrying across the base. I picked up the satellite phone, the metal still warm against my uniform. It was late in Atlanta, somewhere around 3 a.m., but I didn't care. I wanted my family to hear my voice, to know that their daughter had done something worth remembering. The phone rang, and when my mother finally answered, her voice was groggy and irritated. "Ruby, do you know what time it is?" "Mom," I said, barely holding back a smile, "I got the Army Achievement Medal today. I saved our entire base during the siege," they said. Her sigh cut me off. "Medals don't pay bills, Ruby. When are you coming home to help with the restaurant?" My throat tightened. "Did you hear me? I kept 1,200 soldiers alive." "You abandoned us," she snapped. "That medal won't keep Washington's Soul Kitchen from dying. You should be here, not over there pretending to be a hero." The line went quiet. I could hear Calvin's voice in the background. "Tell her we're drowning. Food costs tripled, customers are walking out, nothing tastes right anymore." Then louder, directed at me, "Ever since you left, the place has gone downhill. Grandpa's recipes aren't working, this is on you." I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. "Calvin, you're the one running it. How is that my fault?" He laughed bitterly. "You think heating rations makes you a chef. You don't understand real Southern cooking. You don't understand legacy." The metal on my chest suddenly felt heavy, less like honor and more like a chain dragging me back to their expectations. That night, as the desert wind howled against the tent walls, a courier delivered a letter to me. The handwriting was shaky, but I knew it instantly. Grandpa Moses. "Don't let their bitterness burn your spice, baby girl. Your recipes feed souls, not just stomachs. I've kept every article about you. I've seen what you've done. Don't you dare let them take that from you." I read it twice, then folded it carefully into the pages of his old cookbook. Tears blurred the ink, but my resolve sharpened. The next weeks moved fast. Word of my nutrition protocols spread through the chain of command. I received inquiries from officers I'd never met, requests for recipes, for formula breakdowns. And then came an offer I hadn't expected. An investor willing to put $2 million into my ideas, into a company I hadn't even formed yet. I sat with Jessica one evening outside the mess tent, the Afghan moon hanging above us. Spice Tech, I whispered. That's what I'll call it, not a restaurant, not a kitchen chained to old recipes, a nutrition company that saves lives. Jessica grinned, bumping my shoulder. About time you cooked for yourself. But not everything grew with hope. Sergeant Marcus, the infantryman who had proposed after the siege, sent me an email. He couldn't handle the distance, the danger, the uncertainty of war. He ended it with 2 words that stung more than bullets. I'm done. I folded the screen down and stared into the desert night. The ring he'd given me lay in my pocket, cold as the stones beneath my boots. The rejection from him hurt, but it was nothing compared to the wound of my family's words still ringing in my ears. They wanted me back in Atlanta, chained to an apron, blamed for a sinking business. But Grandpa's letter reminded me I wasn't their servant anymore. I wasn't the kitchen girl. I wasn't just the scapegoat of a fire. I was Sergeant Ruby Washington, and I was about to become something more. The call came deep into the Afghan night, long after the base had gone quiet. My bunkmate shook me awake, pressing the satellite phone into my hand. Calvin's voice crackled through the static. Grandpa Moses had a heart attack. Mom needs you home. His tone carried no warmth, no urgency beyond her convenience. Not we need you, not he asked for you. Just Mom. I stared at the canvas ceiling above my cot, the weight of war pressing on my chest. My unit still needed me. But this was Moses, the only one who had ever seen me. I filed the emergency leave request, boarded the military transport, and by the next week I was stepping off a plane in Atlanta, the air thick and heavy with humidity. No one met me at the airport. I dragged my own duffel into a taxi, staring out the window as familiar streets blurred by. When we pulled up to Grady Memorial Hospital, I sat there a moment, heart pounding, before stepping out into the sterile glow of the emergency wing. Inside, Moses lay motionless, tubes snaking from his arms, machines hissing in rhythm with his shallow breaths. The family hovered like actors rehearsing grief. Coretta dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, sighing loudly whenever a nurse passed. Calvin paced in the hall, phone pressed to his ear, whispering about creditors and unpaid bills. Leela posed in the corner, makeup immaculate, telling anyone who'd listen that the stress of the restaurant had broken her father. I set my duffel down and went to Moses's side. His hand felt fragile in mine, but when I pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, I counted a steady pulse. Years of military medical training kicked in. I adjusted his oxygen flow, checked the chart, caught a dosage error the nurses had overlooked. By dawn, his vitals stabilized. You see, Coretta said when relatives arrived for morning visits, Ruby's playing nurse. At least her army training is good for something. They left me with him for the long hours between visiting shifts. I tracked his numbers, wiped his forehead, slept in the chair at his bedside. I remembered the siege kitchen, the chaos of fire and smoke, and thought, I've kept soldiers alive under worse. I'll keep him alive too. One night near 2 a.m., I slipped into the hospital kitchen. The fluorescent lights buzzed as I stirred gumbo with ingredients scavenged from half-empty shelves. I added cayenne just like he taught me. When I brought the bowl back to his bedside, the smell alone stirred him. His eyes fluttered open, faint but clear, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. You, he rasped, voice no stronger than a whisper. Still got the spice. For the first time in weeks, tears pricked my eyes. I'm here, Grandpa. But when the family rushed in the next morning and found him more alert, they claimed credit. He heard our voices, Leela insisted, gripping his hand as if she had never let go. Calvin announced to the doctors that the family recipes had revived him. I bit my tongue until it bled. Later that evening, when the others were gone, Moses turned his head toward me. His voice was faint but sharp. "Basement, loose board, cookbook, it's yours, keep it safe." His fingers squeezed mine, weak but determined, before he drifted back into uneasy sleep. The truth hit me like a thunderclap. There was more to his recipes than tradition. He had hidden something he wanted only me to find. But while I kept his secrets, Calvin kept digging into lies. I overheard him in the hallway whispering to a business partner. "We'll sell off the equipment first. Nobody will know until it's too late. The place is done anyway." My fists clenched. He wasn't saving the family legacy. He was dismantling it piece by piece. The next day, a new visitor appeared in Moses's room. A tall woman in a crisp uniform, silver eagle insignia gleaming on her shoulders. She introduced herself quietly. "Colonel Sarah Chen, Pentagon Nutrition Program." She looked at me, her gaze steady, as if she had known me all along. "I came to pay my respects," she said, then softer, "and to meet the soldier who turned field rations into survival." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Between Moses's whispered instructions, Calvin's scheming, and the colonel's sudden arrival, the lines of battle were being drawn again. This time not in the dust of Afghanistan, but in the heart of Atlanta. Colonel Chen's visit lingered in my mind long after she left the hospital. Her words had carried the weight of command, but also the recognition I had hungered for my entire life. The soldier who turned field rations into survival. It was a title no one in my family would ever grant me, and hearing it spoken aloud in that sterile hospital room made me realize the battlefield was shifting. 2 nights later, Moses motioned weakly toward the hallway. I followed his gaze until I understood, then slipped down into the restaurant's basement. The air smelled of dust and mildew. Under the weak beam of my flashlight, I found the loose floorboard he had mentioned. Kneeling, I pried it up and uncovered a small metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay his original recipe book, the pages yellowed but dense with handwriting. I flipped through it with trembling hands. Notes scrawled in the margins told stories of the Korean War, substitutions he made when supplies ran low, formulas for balancing nutrition in freezing conditions, even sketches of soldiers eating from battered tin cups. On one page he had written, "These recipes fed 2,000 men in Chasen. They didn't just live, they fought." My throat tightened. The family mocked me for being a cook, but here was proof that our legacy was built on survival, not vanity. When I brought the book back upstairs, I hid it in my duffel. I knew if Calvin or Leela found it, they would twist it into another weapon against me. The next morning, Calvin was already scheming. I overheard him pacing outside the hospital cafeteria, phone pressed to his ear. "300 grand in debt, but we've got assets. I'll sell the old equipment first. And listen, there's a nutrition formula my sister's been cooking up. Pentagon-level stuff. I can get it to you before she even patents it." Rage pulsed through me, hot and sharp. He wasn't saving Washington Soul Kitchen. He was selling its bones and stealing my work. That afternoon, Sterling Chase, the family lawyer, filed new paperwork. When I arrived back at the hospital, I found him seated with Coretta and Leela, a stack of documents in front of them. "We're petitioning for guardianship," Sterling explained smoothly. "Ruby's combat stress makes her unfit to make decisions for the restaurant or Moses's care. We have witnesses, footage, testimony." I blinked. "Footage?" Sterling slid a tablet across the table. The video showed me adjusting Moses's Roman 4 line, my face tense, my movements clipped. But the sound had been edited, spliced with out-of-context shouts from training exercises. It looked as though I were rough, unstable, even dangerous. "You see," Coretta whispered dramatically, pressing a tissue to her eyes. "She's not the same. She scares me." My jaw clenched until it ached. I wanted to shout to call them liars, but years of military discipline held me steady. They had turned my service into a weapon against me. That evening, I found Chen waiting in the lobby. "They'll try to break you," she said bluntly, "but you're not alone." She introduced me to Dr. Maya Singh, a former Army psychologist turned civilian advocate, and Sergeant Jessica Martinez, my old sister-in-arms from Fort Jackson. They had flown down to Atlanta to testify on my behalf. "You saved me once," Jessica said, her grip fierce around my hand. "Now I'm here to save you." She looked directly into my eyes, steady as a rifle sight. "You are not alone, Ruby, not anymore." Hope stirred in my chest. For every lie my family spun, I had allies who carried truth. Later that night, Moses summoned a surge of strength, his voice rasping against the hiss of oxygen. "The real will," he whispered, barely audible. "Behind the false wall kitchen basement. Don't let them steal it." His eyes closed, but the weight of his words pressed down like a command. I sat beside him, holding his frail hand. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about war, one fought with papers and lies instead of rifles. The path ahead was clear. My family would try to bury me under deceit, just as they had during the fire. But this time, I wasn't alone. And this time, I wasn't fighting for their approval. I was fighting for truth, for legacy, for Moses. Colonel Sarah Chen returned 2 days later, this time not as a quiet visitor, but as a storm cutting through the family's rehearsed performances. She entered Moses's hospital room in full uniform, silver eagle on her shoulders gleaming under fluorescent lights. Coretta's eyes narrowed. Calvin straightened in his chair, suddenly uneasy. "I served under a Washington once," Chen said, setting a leather folder on the table. Her gaze lingered on Moses, then on me. "Your grandfather saved my life." The room went still. Even the steady beep of the heart monitor felt louder. Chen opened the folder and pulled out a faded photograph, a gaunt child standing beside a soldier in a field kitchen, steam rising from battered pots. "That was me," she said softly. "Korean War, orphaned, starving. Your grandfather fed me, kept me alive when no one else could. He taught me how food could be more than survival. He gave me my first lesson in service." Moses's lips trembled, his hand squeezed mine weakly. "Sarah, little Sarah," he whispered, his voice a rasp of memory. Chen turned to me. "He told me once he hoped one day someone in his family would carry the torch. That torch is you, Ruby." Coretta scoffed, but her voice wavered. "Fairy tales, that photo proves nothing." "It proves legacy," Chen snapped, her military authority cutting through the room. "And I'll testify to it in any court." For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Calvin's face. His lies were being cornered. Later in the hospital cafeteria, Chen slid a thick packet toward me. "Pentagon files," she explained. "They've been tracking your nutrition work since the siege. Your spice tech formulas aren't just clever, they are strategic assets. We've already deployed them in humanitarian missions. Refugee camps in Sudan, disaster zones in Haiti. You've saved lives you'll never see." The words hit me harder than any metal. I wasn't just a cook, I was a weapon against despair. That night, Moses's condition worsened. I stayed by his bed as machines hummed. He motioned for me to lean closer. "I've been funding you," he whispered, his breath shallow. "Sold some land secret account, all for you, for spice tech. I knew they'd never understand." His frail hand pressed against mine. "Your spice saved more lives than mine ever did. Make sure they know." His chest rose once more, then fell. The line on the monitor flattened into a steady tone. Upstairs, I heard the muffled sound of Coretta's wail, but it rang hollow, rehearsed. I stayed with him long after the nurses had pulled the sheet over his body. When I finally emerged into the hallway, Calvin was already arguing with Sterling, demanding funeral arrangements that would protect the image of the family. Leela scrolled her phone, whispering to friends that she'd be planning the reception. None of them had stayed when it mattered. I returned home that night to find Chen waiting in the kitchen. "You can't fight sentiment with sentiment," she told me bluntly. "You fight it with evidence." She gestured toward the basement. "That will, the financial records, whatever Moses hid, it's time to bring it into the light." So we worked, Chen with her Pentagon connections, Dr. Maya Singh parsing every legal trap Sterling laid, Jessica Martinez calling in soldiers who'd survived on my recipes. By dawn, we had videos, testimonies, financial ledgers, even the deleted security footage recovered and restored, showing Calvin siphoning restaurant funds into his own account. Jessica played one of the clips aloud. A soldier's voice rang through the room. "If not for Sergeant Washington's rations, I wouldn't be here today." She pressed pause, looking at me. "This isn't just defense, Ruby, it's truth." But the crown jewel was Moses's real will, tucked behind the false wall in the basement kitchen. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "To my granddaughter Ruby, who carries the true spice of our family, I leave the restaurant, the recipes, and the emergency fund. Calvin is to receive nothing for betrayal of our values." I pressed the will against my chest, feeling both the weight of legacy and the surge of vindication. For once, the truth wasn't whispered in shadows. It was written in ink, undeniable, yet I knew the courtroom would be the real battlefield. And just like in Afghanistan, the enemy wasn't going to surrender without a fight. The funeral passed in a blur of hymns and hollow words. My family put on their best faces for the mourners, Calvin in a pressed suit, Leela draped in black silk, Coretta weeping loudly into her handkerchief as if tears could hide rot. I stayed silent at the back, clutching Moses's real will beneath my jacket, knowing the true battle still lay ahead. A week later, we gathered inside Sterling Chase's law office. The mahogany table gleamed under amber lights, stacks of documents neatly arranged like weapons on a battlefield. Coretta sat rigid, pearls looped tight around her neck, her gaze fixed on me with quiet venom. Calvin leaned back in his chair, sweat beading at his temple despite the air conditioning. Leela perched delicately at his side, her grief rehearsed. I came in wearing my dress blues, the medal pinned firmly above my heart, Colonel Chen and Dr. Maya Singh flanking me like sentinels. Jessica Martinez slid into the seat behind me, ready to testify if needed. I wasn't alone anymore. Sterling cleared his throat and opened a thick envelope. "This is the official will of Moses Washington, notarized and dated." He unfolded the paper with deliberate ceremony. "To my children Coretta and Charles, I leave equal control of Washington's Soul Kitchen. To my grandchildren Calvin and Leela, I leave full operational rights upon their mother's retirement. To my granddaughter Ruby, I leave memories and my love." The words hit the air like a hammer. Coretta's lips curled in triumph. Calvin smirked, muttering, "As it should be." Reporters in the back scribbled furiously, already shaping the headline, "Decorated Soldier Disinherited." I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a second envelope on the table. "That's not his last will." Sterling bristled. "Excuse me." "This," I said firmly, sliding the document forward, "was hidden in the basement kitchen wall where Moses told me it would be. Signed, notarized, and witnessed, dated 2 weeks before the version you just read." Gasps rippled through the room. Sterling's face paled as he opened it, eyes darting across the page. Chen leaned forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "Read it aloud." Sterling swallowed hard. "To my granddaughter Ruby, who carries the true spice of our family, I leave Washington's Soul Kitchen, the original recipes, and the emergency fund of $400,000. To Calvin and Leela, nothing, for betrayal of family values." The room erupted. Coretta shot to her feet. "This is a forgery. He was senile." Calvin slammed his fist against the table, veins bulging in his neck. She planted it. Objection already answered, Chen snapped. She produced a tablet and played a video recorded days before Moses's death. His frail face filled the screen, but his voice was steady. This is my will. I am of sound mind. Ruby is the one she always was. Coretta's face drained of color. Leela's mouth fell open. Calvin stammered. He didn't mean it like that. But the avalanche had begun. Dr. Singh produced medical evaluations proving Moses's clarity. Jessica queued up video testimonies from soldiers I'd fed in Afghanistan, each one describing how my recipes saved their lives. Then Chen laid down Pentagon letters confirming spice tech contracts valued at over $600 million. The evidence stacked higher and higher. Sterling tried one last strike, thrusting forward the edited footage of me adjusting Moses's Roman 4. She's unstable, dangerous. Look at this. Chen countered instantly, producing the unedited version. The full scene played, me steadying Moses's vitals, saving him from a nurse's error. Sterling's attack crumbled. Then came the final blow. Recovered financial records revealed Calvin had siphoned $180,000 from the restaurant over 5 years. The screen glowed with bank statements, signatures, proof undeniable. Judge Hayes, called to preside, slammed his gavel. The evidence is overwhelming. This court recognizes the most recent will as valid. Calvin Washington, you are ordered to repay the stolen funds or face criminal charges. Washington's Soul Kitchen and its assets are hereby transferred to Ruby Washington as the rightful heir. The gallery exploded with murmurs. Reporters leaned forward, snapping photos, recording every word. I closed my eyes, drawing a slow breath. For the first time in years, truth had spoken louder than lies. But even as the judgment echoed, I knew the war wasn't over. The family's fury burned hotter than ever, and vindication carried its own cost. I rose, my voice steady. I didn't fight for their approval. I fought for the truth, for Moses, and for the soldiers who ate when they should have starved. The judge nodded once. Then may the record show that truth has finally been served. But as I gathered the will and pressed it to my chest, I felt the next battle already rising. I hadn't just won the restaurant. I had exposed every lie my family had built. Now, I would have to defend it. The ink on Judge Hayes's ruling was barely dry when Calvin exploded. She stole my grandfather. She stole my recipes. His fists pounded the table so hard the pens rattled. Coretta clutched her pearls, her voice shrill. She's not family. She's a soldier. Soldiers don't cook. I stood still, every inch of me calm. Years of military discipline had trained me for this moment. I waited until the shouting dimmed, then stepped forward. Your Honor, I would like to make a statement. The judge nodded, granting me the floor. I placed both hands on the polished table, feeling the cool surface under my scarred palms. I fed 5,000 soldiers daily in combat zones. I've created nutrition protocols that prevented mass casualties. I carry scars from fires I didn't start, and I carry my grandfather's spice, the real family legacy. A hush settled across the room. Reporters raised their cameras. Even the jury leaned in closer. One by one, I dismantled every lie. Calvin's thefts, Coretta's manipulations, Leela's silence during the fire. Documents and testimony stacked behind my words like ammunition. Chen played soldier videos on the projector, men and women describing how my meals gave them strength, how a simple broth kept them alive through frostbite, exhaustion, despair. This is an invention, I told them. It's truth, lived and proven. They called me a kitchen girl, but my food fought wars none of you will ever see. Sterling Chase, their lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. He knew the ground had crumbled beneath him. But then came the unexpected fracture. Leela, who had sat quiet through most of the trial, rose suddenly. Her voice shook, but the words carried. It wasn't Ruby who caused the fire, it was me. I left the fryer on. I blamed her because I was afraid. I let everyone destroy her life. The room gasped. Coretta's face went pale, Calvin hissed her name, but Leela pressed on. She saved people that night. She saved me, and I let her carry the blame. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the storm broke. Coretta shouted, "Lies, she's protecting her." Calvin lunged to grab her arm, but the bailiff stepped in. The courtroom fractured into chaos. Through it all, I stood tall, my voice cutting clean as a sniper's shot. The truth has been buried for years, but today it is exposed. I carried the weight of your lies because I thought silence meant love. It didn't. Silence meant complicity, and I am done being complicit. Chen tapped the screen, bringing up one final piece of evidence: Pentagon contracts and humanitarian reports, showing my formulas already saving millions worldwide. "This isn't just about a family restaurant," she told the court. "It's about national security, about global survival. Ruby Washington's work feeds soldiers and refugees alike. To call her unfit is to spit on the lives she's already saved." Judge Hayes struck his gavel for order. "Enough. The record will reflect not just inheritance, but vindication. This woman has proven beyond doubt that she is heir to the Washington name and legacy, and this court recommends federal charges against Calvin Washington for attempted sale of classified nutritional formulas." The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. "Sergeant Washington, how does it feel to win? Do you plan to run the restaurant?" Microphones crowded the air in front of me, their red lights blinking like fireflies. I didn't answer. I simply lifted Moses's will and held it aloft for all to see. Coretta sank back into her chair, eyes darting, her lips moving in silent prayers no one believed. Calvin cursed, struggling against the bailiff's grip as he was escorted out. Leela sat slumped, tears streaking her mascara, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Sterling quietly gathered his papers, his confidence gone, his eyes fixed on the floor. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight slide from my shoulders. For the first time in years, truth had spoken louder than lies, but even in victory, the cost was clear. My family had shattered completely. There would be no reconciliation, no shared meals, no return to what once was. As the gavel fell for the last time, I thought of Grandpa's words: "Food is love made visible." I had tried to love them with silence, with sacrifice, with service, but love without truth was poison. Chen walked beside me out of the courthouse. Flashbulbs lit our path, the crowd pressing closer, voices rising. One reporter shouted, "Ruby, what's next for you?" I stopped at the steps, raised my chin, and said only, "To build." Jessica squeezed my hand, whispering, "You didn't just win, Spice. You burned the lies to ash." I nodded, but deep inside I felt the burden shift. Vindication wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The fight had never been about a restaurant. It was about what came after, and I was ready to face it. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the cameras still flashed and the questions swirled, but I felt a quietness inside me I had never known. The judge's gavel had closed one battle, but the real work stretched out ahead like a long road. Vindication alone could not heal scars or restore what had been broken. Legacy was not a trophy to be held aloft, it was something to be lived. I returned to the restaurant weeks later, keys heavy in my hand. The front windows were streaked with dust. The neon sign flickered faintly, and the air inside was stale with the memory of arguments and grease fires. For a long time I stood in the doorway, listening to the silence. This place had been the stage of my humiliation and the prison of my youth. Yet it was also where Grandpa Moses had taught me that food could be love made visible. I did not reopen it as it was. Instead, I rebuilt it. With Chen's help, Jessica's steady hands, and a team of veterans who had once eaten my field rations, we tore out the broken booths and replaced them with long tables. The kitchen was modernized, the walls painted bright, and on one side we left a mural, a soldier passing a bowl of soup to a child. Beneath it, the words, "Every meal is a mission." We called it the Washington Culinary Institute. Veterans came not as customers but as students, learning to turn hardship into craft. Some arrived still trembling from nightmares, others broken from years of war. But they found healing in the rhythm of knives on cutting boards, in the scent of bread rising in ovens, in the pride of feeding others. By the first year's end, 200 veterans had graduated, most finding jobs across the country. At night, I walked through the kitchen garden we planted behind the building. We used soil brought from Moses's old patch, the same earth where he had once grown peppers and herbs. Each graduate planted one herb before leaving, a memory that would keep growing long after they were gone. The rose swayed gently in the wind, basil beside thyme, rosemary beside sage, all rooted in the same ground. The legacy stretched far beyond Atlanta. Spice Tech expanded under Pentagon contracts, supplying bases across the world. Refugee camps in Syria, flood victims in Louisiana, earthquake survivors in Nepal, all received the formulas once scribbled in the margins of Moses's notebook. Soldiers wrote me letters, describing how a pouch of fortified stew had kept them standing in battle. Refugee children sent drawings of steaming bowls and smiling faces. Recognition followed. A James Beard Award nomination arrived, not for fine dining, but for innovation in nutrition. I gave a talk in Washington, speaking about how food was more than calories. It was resilience, it was hope. A network special aired, calling me the Army cook who changed how America eats. But none of that mattered as much as watching a veteran with shaking hands plate a dish for the first time and smile, believing again in his own worth. My family faded into their own shadows. Calvin served prison time before vanishing into obscurity, working fryers at a roadside diner. Coretta moved into a small apartment, her calls for money ignored until they stopped coming. Leela divorced, bankrupt, living out of sight. I carried no revenge toward them. The war with them was over, and I had no appetite for fighting ghosts. Chen retired and joined me as a mentor, teaching the students military precision in kitchens as if they were still soldiers. She confided once that Moses had written her letters about me for years, calling me the one who got the spice right. Her voice broke when she said it, and for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to cry. I carried that truth like a flag. Legacy was not about blood, it was about choice. And I chose to build a family of those who had known hunger, rejection, and silence, and who found strength again through food. One spring morning, I stood in the garden behind the institute. Students knelt beside me, planting herbs in neat rows. I placed my own hands in the soil, feeling the grit under my nails, the same earth that had stained Grandpa's hands long ago. At the center of the garden, we set a stone carved with his name. Moses Washington, Army cook, lifesaver, spice keeper. The sun rose higher, catching on the leaves, warming my face. I closed my eyes and breathed in the mingled scents of thyme, basil, and sage. For the first time, I felt whole. I wasn't the kitchen girl anymore. I wasn't just a soldier or a scapegoat or even a CEO. I was all of those things together and more. I had turned pain into purpose, recipes into revolution, silence into a legacy loud enough to echo for generations. The story of my family ended in court, but my story was just beginning, written in spice and soil, carried in every meal I served. If you've followed me this far, I thank you. May this story remind you that no matter how deep rejection cuts, there is always a recipe for rebuilding. I wish you peace, health, and the strength to carry your own legacy forward. Subscribe to the channel for more untold journeys, Leave a comment if this story spoke to you, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like this are not just entertainment. They are a way to remember, to honor, and to keep alive the truth that even in the harshest battles, love can still be made visible.